now have a paper by Marianne Walter. Um, she is an associate professor of English at the University of the Virgin Islands. She has also taught at the Middle East Technical University in Northern Cyprus, Cambridge, Plovdiv, and Northwestern, with degrees in linguistics from Harvard and MIT. Her interests include phonology, phonetics, and sociolinguistics of Middle Eastern languages. And the paper she's presenting is called The Persistence of Morphou, Diachronic Awareness and Usage of Toponyms in Northern Cyprus.
Yes, thank you. So this work is based on data collected during my time in Northern Cyprus, and Morphou is one of these toponyms, one of these place names in North Cyprus, which will be very important, as we'll see. But the title, Persistence of Morphou, is based on this iconic painting, The Persistence of Memory, and the alliteration is just a happy accident between Morphou and memory. So this is a painting which you might recognize. It's actually one of a series of paintings by Salvador Dali from the 1930s. And he said he was exploring through these paintings the relativity of space and time, a surrealist meditation on the collapse of our notions of a fixed cosmic order. Which could also, of course, be a political order and the collapse of that order. And I think of it as very abstractly, but yet very literally showing how chronology in the form of timepieces is embedded in landscape and memory, as the title of the painting says. And Cyprus is a rich field for investigation in that respect. So here are a couple of my favorite examples of place names in Cyprus and what they show about the island's history. So on the left, you see this village with a mosque tower in the middle, a hillside village, and its name is Angoulême. And this is in the northern Turkish-speaking part of Cyprus. And on the right is the French city with its own tower. This time it's a church tower on a hillside, and this is the city of Angoulême in France. And the Cypriot version, the name dates from the Crusader kingdom period when the Lusignan French dynasty were the rulers of Cyprus, a period which lasted about 300 years. And it's a small village. You can see that the Cypriot version is much smaller than the French version, but it's still quite well known and recognizable because there's a brand of bottled water which comes from this village. And so it's plastered on water bottles all over the place in Cyprus. And another example is the village of Kapouti, which is actually the village around the university campus where I did this work. And you can see it on the left. You can even see a bit of the campus toward the right side of the picture, a dormitory. The big white building in the foreground is a student dormitory. And the source of this name is from the Italian landowner, Capuzzi, who owned this whole area as part of an estate during the Venetian period of Cyprus, which lasted for about 100 years after the Lusignan period, so covering most of the 1500s. And Angoulême is still used as a place name. Kapouti is no longer used as a place name. It's been replaced. But both of them together show the sort of rich linguistic history that is still revealed in at least some of the place names of Northern Cyprus. And now it's a Greek and Turkish speaking island, and these zones are separated, which is a relatively recent occurrence. But this binary, the Greek-Turkish binary, although very powerful, doesn't really show with accuracy the variety that existed in both the past and present, which goes beyond just those two. French, Italian, Ottomans, British, and so on. The division only occurred in 1974 when there was a de facto division, a conflict and a de facto division of the island into these two sides, and accompanying population movements, big demographic changes. And as is unfortunately so often associated with that, lots of destruction, lots of reconstruction, lots of renaming of places on both sides of this border. So We're lucky we have really good historical records, and also it's quite recent. So this paper is not about investigating what are those names, tracing etymologies or anything like that, because we're very fortunate to already know that. Rather, the research questions are about the extent to which this knowledge still exists in the local population, at least on the Turkish side, the Turkish population. So first question is, to what extent are young adult Turkish Cypriots aware of historical place names in their homeland? And by historical, I mean ones which might have been different before the division, when massive renaming happened and places were given morphologically transparent Turkish names, which maybe they didn't have before. And the second question looks at a different population, which is young people, same age, who are not Cypriot. They are coming from Turkey, mainland Turkey, and they come for university education because this is a big economic sector in the island. So they're in Cyprus for a period of several years, studying alongside Turkish Cypriots and people from other countries, third countries. And so our question is, well, how much do they learn during this period? Assuming that the Turkish Cypriots retain at least some knowledge of these older pre-1974 names, does that knowledge get transferred to these to their classmates who are coming from Turkey? And then the third question is, who chooses to use these place names and why? So knowledge doesn't imply usage necessarily. Do people still use them? Who is still using them? Who are they learned from? Where is this transmission going? So hypotheses are that young adult Turkish Cypriots know some, maybe not all, but some of these older place names, which are not transparently Turkish, and that young adult citizens from Turkey maybe know some, but not as many, probably. And that Turkish Cypriots exploit their knowledge as a way of displaying their local identity. And that's when and why they choose to use them. So this is a small project which included both qualitative and quantitative components. So a almost balanced group of almost 10 students in each group, the Turkish Cypriot group and the mainland Turkish young adult group, took part in this study, and all of them undergraduate students. So I gave them, they looked at this small corpus of place names from the same area in Cyprus where their university is located, the Northwest area. Each one had a new version, which is transparently Turkish, and an older version, which is not transparently Turkish, maybe Greek, maybe something else. They all assume Greek. And they had to not be obvious phonetic equivalents. So there are very many where, okay, there's a Greek name and a Turkish name, but you look at them and they're the same name. So Gaziveren versus Gazivera, it's too easy to guess. It couldn't be that easy for them. So that gave me this set of 23 names. And they're from this NGO organization, PRIO, which does civil society work, research, and policy work across both sides of the island. And one of the things they do is collect stories, oral histories, with people who were displaced during this kind of mutual ethnic cleansing. And they want to document neighborhood maps and the older names and things like that before this generation passes. So wonderful resource. So I asked the participants first open-ended questions about their knowledge. Do they know about any place names that used to be different than they are now, than the new official names? If so, what are some examples? How did you hear them? Who used them? Which one do you prefer to use yourself? Is it always the same, or is it different according to context? And so on. And then these are the more quantitative tasks. So first I just gave them a list of the new Turkish names and said, okay, these all do have older names, different names. Do you know them? Whichever ones you know, can you write them down? And the third task is exactly the same, except I gave them as the next stage, so these are going in order, the earlier or Greek names, and said, okay, these are Greek, these are the older names. Do you know what it's called now? If so, could you write it here? And then the fourth and final task was the exact same list, but in both versions, randomized order. Could they match them together? So each one just sort of changing what is the information giving and adding to the information giving to see how much could they get with a bit more information. So we'll kind of go through these sequentially, starting with the first list. When you give them the Turkish names, modern names, the participants from Turkey could identify 2 of them on average. And they didn't really guess. They had these 2 that they thought they knew and they stuck with that. And the participants from Cyprus knew more. So on 5.8 on average. So, 3 times as many. But interestingly, they did make mistakes, and sometimes they would misidentify one, but they were willing to do that, to go out on that limb, which was very interesting. I thought it shows maybe more of a sense of ownership and willingness to take risks in that way. So the third task was where they had the Greek list, older list, and had to say, did they know the modern name? And again, participants from Turkey knew 2, the same 2, which they already had displayed knowledge of. And the participants from Cyprus did improve their performance. So once they saw the older name, it gave them a bit of help, and they were able to get one more. Oh yeah, now it's this one. Again, with a couple of misidentifications. And, okay. And then finally, the matching task. Again, participants from Turkey, exactly the same thing. There's the 2 that they know. Participants from Cyprus, their performance went up yet another bit more. And they could get 1 more on average compared to the earlier ones. But notice there's a big range. So that's the average, but some people could get 10, which is nearly half the list, and others could get just 4. So everyone from the Cypriot group got at least 4, but some got a lot more than others. Okay, so here's just a little numeric summary of these results, which show that consistently, as expected, the participants from Cyprus are getting a lot more correct than the participants from Turkey, and also their performance is improving as they move through the tasks, whether that's because there's a kind of priming effect as they go through it, or because the format of the task just makes it easier, the later ones, by giving more information. And then I looked at, okay, which ones are they more able to identify? And if we skip back down here, the Turkey participants, there's basically 2, Güzelyurt and Kalkanlı, which are the most identified ones, and then a couple more which just got 1 identification each, kind of random ones. And Güzelyurt happens to be Morphou, the name from the title of the paper. So that's the closest city. The university itself is in Kalkanlı, which is the new name for Caputi. So this Italian version was replaced with a Turkish version. And then that's the university village, let's say, and Güzelyurt, aka Morphou, is the closest town, which is about 5 miles down the road. Cyprus participants also got those overwhelmingly, and also some others that they were more reliably able to identify, which again are very nearby. So they're the closest ones, which they visit more and interact with more. Okay, so this is pretty consistent with expectations. There's this one town, Akıncılar, which is not very local, but it was also identified because it's in the history books. There was a significant massacre there during the conflict, and so people tended to know about it more than the others. And another interesting thing which pops out is that I mentioned there's this range in performance for the Cypriots, and it's the ones from the capital city, which is Nicosia, and Kyrenia, which is the main tourist city, who don't know anything. And that's like the penalty for living in the metropolis. I mean, it's Cyprus, so it's still small, but is that you don't get the kind of interaction outside that little bubble, and they each only knew one or two. They were not nearly as knowledgeable as the others about other local place names. Okay, so now circling back to the qualitative data, the students from Turkey said, most of them, more than half, yeah, we know that there are different names for places, and this is before they get the list, any of the lists, and they identified these tourist places, which interestingly, these different names that they identified are the English names of these places, which are used in tourist materials. And Famagusta in particularly is significant. So Famagusta is the famous city where Othello takes place, but it's not called Famagusta either in Turkish or in Greek. It's a kind of Western European invention of a name, but that's the name that they know as being different from what the local people actually call it. And then they gave some explanations, gave some comments about where they learned these. They learned it from Reddit. They learned it from Google. I was really shocked when they came out with this. And then some of them learned, from their friends, their local friends, or people they meet, or their local taxi driver, so they learn from people around them, but they also go online. And I think that's very interesting because it shows that they go looking for this information. It's not just coming up, or it is coming up organically in their local interactions, but also they have that motivation and interest to do some online research of their own. Although it doesn't get them very far, as we saw. And when I asked them about their usage, there was a bit of a range. So some people, one person said both, but mostly they prefer to use the new ones, the Turkish ones. And one participant was pretty forthcoming about how the reason for that being that it's not for him to say because he's not a local. And so that's what the government has decided. And whether or not some locals go along with that, he feels like he has to go along with that and follow the official name terminology, even though it's recent, let's say. And that participant, I can add, is one who knew more than the others. So he had a higher level of knowledge, but also felt this kind of moral constraint in what he used. And then as for the Cyprus participants, they all knew. They completely knew, yes, there are different names. They're highly aware of that. And they did not give these English touristic names. And they mostly identified the older relatives, older neighbors, who were the people who mostly used these terms. And so they just picked them up in this organic way as they were growing up. And they also gave different answers. They had different preferences, some of them, in what to use. So a couple of them said they prefer to use the new Turkish versions because that's what they're used to. They were not alive at the time that the earlier names were official, and so they don't prefer to use them. But most of them said, after the first couple of bullet points, that it varies. It's contextually varying which one they prefer to use, and they would normally use the older ones with other Cypriots, and they use the newer ones with their friends from Turkey, maybe their classmates who came over for their education, or visitors, lots of tourism coming over from mainland Turkey. So then they use the new ones, and they accommodate in this way to their interlocutor so that they don't cause any confusion for them, except for one participant who says they usually use the new ones, the official Turkish ones, but they prefer to use the older ones when they're talking to foreign people. So exactly the opposite of the others. Instead of using the older local ones with Cypriots and the newer ones with outsiders, flipping that. That's just fascinating to me. And this participant did not expand further on why. We can just speculate that this is an exclusionary move, and if showing that if using them with other Cypriots is a mark of common identity, kind of asserting a shared identity as locals, then all the more so if you cause a misunderstanding with an outsider, which demonstrates very conclusively that they are an outsider through this use of names, which are known not to be understood. Or let's take a more charitable view, maybe, and maybe it's meant to be educational, because they do say, the Turkish students, that the outsiders, that they learn them from locals. So this is one way that they could learn. Just a final point, Morphou, the one version of it is Morphou, and this pops up as a surname. And surnames were chosen en masse with the establishment of a new government, unrecognized, but still a de facto new government in northern Cyprus. So that came in 1974, and the years afterwards, there were new official documents. People had to choose official names, or maybe could do a new one, which they hadn't had before. And this is a very popular one, Morphou, which means from Morphou. So these are the results of a Facebook search I did. Some of them are even my friends, as you can see, of people with this surname. The list goes on, but that's just a quick screenshot. Now, if you do the parallel name, Güzelyurt Lu, so Güzelyurt is the new name of Morphou, and add the same suffix, Lu, which makes it an adjective and a name, you get some results. But this is just a group. It's not a person. It's a group of Güzelyurt restaurants, residents, Facebook group for them. And this is the Güzelyurt, it doesn't even have Güzelyurt Lu. And there's a couple of people who have this surname, but it's rare in comparison. So it's very clear that people chose to name themselves as people after the original name of their hometown and not the new name. Even in this process of state formation and new identity formation, they went to the old identity and expressed that through their naming choices rather than the new one. And it's not only Morphou and Güzelyurt. So there's another town called Elya. That's the old name. New name is Doğancı. And you can see exactly the same pattern where there are lots of Elyalis. But there is one Doğancılı, and the rest are like businesses or civic organizations, but not people. People didn't want to choose this as a name for themselves. So final slide, wrapping up, there's a clear asymmetry in both knowledge and usage of older names. So the participants from Cyprus know more of them. The participants from Turkey don't use them, even if they know them, and also they know them less. But the Cypriot participants are very savvy in adapting their usage to the context, the conversational context, but definitely exploit their knowledge as a way to signal their local identity, not only in their conversation, but even through their surnames. Thank you, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Marianne. That was great. That was super interesting. Let's see, do we have some questions? The change in toponyms is always so interesting, how people perceive them and how they use them. It's all bound up in social context. We've been getting a lot of papers recently for the Names Journal about changes in toponyms, so it's a very top of mind.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this issue of the kind of afterlife of the names. So officially, maybe call it what you want, but people are also going to do what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I have a question, if I may.
Please go ahead.
I wondered, and I thought of this when the previous paper back a ways was talking about the change in people's perception of a particular area. And I'm wondering if there's any correlation between that and your work with the growing use of digital maps instead of where you actually are using like GPS to locate, to go from point to point, rather than seeing and understanding a large area, a map of a large area. I know that in my teaching, I sometimes had college students who had never learned how to read a map. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that. Is there any correlation that you've noticed?
Certainly, people are aware and annoyed at Google Maps and how it, for example, it gives Greek names in Greek alphabet, even in the
Okay.
north, due to its independence not being recognized.
Mhm.
And so, that's kind of a slap in the face. Like, this is still going to be given in Greek for the Turkish Cypriots. But on the other hand, Google Maps is sort of crowdsourceable because people can add their own locations and names for things. And so there's sort of that way to put your stamp, put your mark on it. So it sort of cuts both ways, I think.
Which then makes it difficult to determine kind of an official name.
Mhm.
I mean, if people are adding their own, who's to say what the official name is? Anyway, just a thought that maybe there is something there. Thank you.
There's also a question in the chat, just making sure you see it.
Yes, a young Cypriot who uses the former names with foreigners and the new names with locals. Some locals would react badly to using. Oh, very interesting. Yes, that seems plausible. That depending on the other locals' level of involvement, maybe in the conflict or role in the new government, that they would not appreciate that. So, I mean, some would, some wouldn't, but maybe you wouldn't know ahead of time which way that would go. Yes, that's a great observation. Thank you.
So I don't see anything else. I'm sure if people have more comments or questions, they might pop them into the chat for you. So thank you very much. That was great. Great data collection, super interesting.